Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thrilled to be here.
Welcome, welcome, everyone. I think we'll get started. So hello and welcome to today's ACMP member webinar. Our topic today, Lead Through the A.R.C.s of Change and Crisis, will be presented by Barbara Troutline. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Daniel Liss. I will be your moderator for today. And before we get started, I would like to share a little bit of information about latest happenings at ACMP. So first off, we hope we'll be seeing some of you at our next event, Change London, next week, which we're very excited about. Also very excited about, ACMP's prestigious certification program now has over 2,000 CCMPs. So now is the time to join this elite class of change management professionals and experience the opportunities that CCMP will open up for you. For more information on applying for or renewing your CCMP, please visit acmpglobal.org/CCMP. In addition, one of our most valuable member benefits is our ACMP resource library, where you can access 10 years worth of member-only tools, webinars, conference presentations, and white papers. The resource library is constantly ranked as one of our top member benefits, so we hope you will take advantage of it. And then we also have an upcoming webinar, which we hope that you will join us for, called Driving Adoption, Arriving at Adoption, presented by Crystal Thomas on November 14th, 2023 at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And then also be sure to visit our event calendar at acmpglobal.org and discover our other educational opportunities that might interest you. All right, and then so a few housekeeping things before we get started. So first off, all audio lines have been muted. Today's webinar will run until 1 p.m. Eastern Time, so 1 hour. If you have questions or comments during the presentation, please post it in the question box in the panel on the right side of your screen in the GoToWebinar user interface panel. Questions for the presenters will be answered at the end of the presentation. And now I would like to introduce today's presenter. Barbara Troutline, thank you for joining, is author of the best-selling book, Change Intelligence, Use the Power of CQ to Lead Change That Sticks. She is principal and founder of Change Catalysts and originator of the CQ system for developing change intelligent leaders in organizations. For over 30 years, Barbara has coached executives, trained leaders at all levels, certified change agents, and facilitated mission-critical change management initiatives, achieving bottom-line business and powerful leadership results for clients. Thank you for joining us, Barbara, and I turn it over to you to get us started.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you, ACMP, for having me. Thrilled to be here. I'm sure that our audience knows your IQ, or at least the range it's in, and probably has heard of EQ, or emotional intelligence. Today, we're going to talk about CQ, or change intelligence, which I think is a mission-critical capability that we all need to lead ourselves through the A.R.C.s, as I will explain, of change and crisis. So I'm always thrilled to be here with the ACMP. I went to my first ACMP event, which was the global conference back in LA in April of 2013. And that was very exciting because it was 1 month before my book and assessment were published. And so we're all having our 10-year anniversary. Then I helped start up the Midwest chapter here. My company was one of the first QEPs, qualified education providers. And so it's been a great 10 years and also a great 2 weeks, because welcome back. Any of you who were at the masterclass that I co-facilitated last week with Rich Maltzman, or that I might have seen in person here in Chicagoland at our in-person event last week. I'm excited to be here right now and going to be submitting a couple of proposals to speak again next year. And I hope you all do too, because I also want to hear from you and your successes and struggles and best practices, hopefully in person at San Diego, and or else at another virtual event sometimes in 2024. So again, welcome everyone. So, two sides of any crisis: danger and opportunities. Well, a bit about myself. I started my company, Change Catalyst, in 1989 during an economic recession, very difficult economic times. Fast forward 20 years after I'd spent a couple of decades helping people, teams, and organizations lead change and develop change leadership capabilities, in 2009, we had the global financial meltdown starting in the housing markets. That's when I actually developed a specific approach to leading change, the CQ system for developing change intelligence, that we're going to talk about today, in response to needing to invent a new way to help myself and my clients through that time of massive uncertainty and fear. So when I first did business in China, a Chinese colleague let me know that this is the Mandarin symbol for crisis, and it consists of two different characters. One character stands for danger, and the other for opportunity. And we all know the dangers that we've experienced as a global community in the last, well, definitely 3.5 years since the pandemic, ranging from COVID-19 to social justice issues, environmental issues, economic issues, and wars. So the dangers that we've been facing as a global community are very obvious, very palpable, very real for a lot of us. However, what's not as obvious is that in the midst of these or any seismic shifts is also opportunity, So just like my business and CQ was started in very challenging times, I think that there's opportunity hidden in the midst of any crisis. And one of the biggest opportunities is the opportunities to learn and grow. So that's what we're all going to do together. Our promise for today is to learn change intelligence strategies to help ourselves, our teams, and our organizations build agility, resilience, and change capability. So that's one of the arcs of change: A, agility, R, resilience, and C, change capability. So we're going to start with ourselves. We're going to start with ourselves and talk about how to cope with the stress of change, the stress of crises, and develop personal resilience. And then we're going to look at strategies to support our team and nurture psychological safety and agility. Finally, we're going to look at setting up our organization, so how to inspire a growth versus a fixed collective mindset, and position challenges as pop-up learning labs to build capability for now and for the future. How can we reframe these obstacles that we're facing, these crises, to opportunities, right? So we have that growth mindset, and any change challenge that we're dealing with can be looked at as both the problem to be solved for today and a way to build capability to set us all up for success, to deal with any of the problems, any of the change challenges and opportunities that we'll see in the future, and accelerate transformation ultimately to an even more change capable culture. So we're going to explore science and experience ways to do exactly that. So I would love to start off with getting some involvement, some chat opportunities. So shout out, or rather type in, what are the change challenges that you're dealing with right now? I know that you're here because you're leading many changes and you're impacted by many other ones. So what are some of those that you're dealing with? Being involved in the ACMP and with our change peeps for quite some time, I know that a lot of us are dealing with things like, digital transformation. There's AI. We're talking about ChatGPT all the time. So that's one thing that's impacting us. Designing and implementing and upgrading all kinds of technology platforms and business processes. Maybe dealing with mergers and acquisitions and integrations. And we're all dealing with, I think, shifting workforce demographics and leadership challenges. So we're all dealing with a great many changes at once. And I think we're here as change professionals because are these changes easy or difficult to lead through? Well, again, I think that even positive change, even change that's self-initiated, can be challenging. There can be roadblocks. It can be more difficult along the way. And change can just seem sometimes like it's hard. And we all know the statistics around the failure rate of change. And again, whether we totally buy into some of those, I think we just have the sense that oftentimes organizations fail to realize all the benefits of the changes that they hope for. And certainly it's even more challenging in times of crisis. So what I distinguished in my first 20 years of helping people, teams, and organizations lead change is that people who are highly successful in other aspects of their career struggled with change, and organizations struggled to achieve the benefits they hope for. So I recognize that while a lot of people are highly experienced with change, we're far less experienced with change done right. A lot of us are highly experienced with change, far less experienced with change done right, and I wonder why that is. So I'm an organizational psychologist by training, and there's just been a fascinating explosion of research in neuroscience in the last 10, 20 years by David Rock and his colleagues at the Neuro Leadership Institute and elsewhere, which I think is really fascinating and very empowering for all of us who are leading change. So first, what the research has shown is that when neuroscientists place electrodes on people's brains and introduce them to a change, the same neuroreceptors fire when our brain gets introduced to change as when we feel physical pain. So in a very real sense, to our brain, change equals pain. So what's the implication of that? What's the implication of that? What happens to us physiologically? What happens to our body when that fear, threat, pain reaction is evoked in our brains? Well, what happens to our body is that all the good stuff that feeds our brain, the oxygen, the glucose, gets sucked down past our necks. So we can fight, we can flight, we can freeze, or another F I heard, we can faint, right? A lot of these these physiological reactions happen, and what all those reactions have in common is that change makes us less smart. Just when we need our cognitive capabilities to think clearly and creatively, to invent new solutions, to pivot, to innovate, we get blinders on. We go to our well-learned, dominant, habituated patterns, things that made us successful in the past, but we don't even do those well. That's our brain on change. So that can seem like a bad news story. That can seem like a bad news story. However, I think it's actually a good news story. I think it actually is empowering for us as change leaders because it normalizes resistance. It helps us see that that resistance to change, that resistance in crisis that we feel is normal and natural. It's literally what helps us survive as individuals and why we've thrived as a species. However, what's the number one topic in the change management literature? It's overcoming resistance to change, overcoming resistance to change. The whole vibe is that resistance is bad and wrong, and we're not effective change leaders if we get it. We have the opportunity to reframe that resistance, that fear, threat reaction that we get in our brains and we see in our teams and our organizations from our enemy to our ally, and leverage it as powerful information to change the only thing we can, which is what? Which is ourselves. Start with ourselves, start with ourselves. So brain science is also distinguished three factors in particular. There's more than three, but three in particular that can be particularly threatening to our brain in times of change and crisis. And that's the first arc of change: autonomy, relatedness, and certainty. So just taking something that we can all relate to in our global community is the COVID crisis, the pandemic. How that crisis impacted our sense of autonomy was obvious because so much was out of our control and unwanted changes were forced upon us. How the COVID crisis impacted our sense of relatedness is also obvious through the need for social distancing and remote working. And finally, perhaps most threatening in times of change and crisis is how they impact our sense of certainty. Because with respect to the virus, so much about its spread and long-term impact were fundamentally unknown and unknowable. So again, this can seem like a bad news story, but we have the opportunity to help ourselves and others move from the fear, threat, danger to the opportunity side of crisis. We can learn how to not just react, but to respond. As we say in emotional intelligence, right? And I think emotional intelligence is also key to success in work and life. Also with change intelligence, ABC. ABC. First, be aware. Be aware that this is happening in our brain and body. Then breathe. Breathe. Breathe, get the oxygen flowing back to our brain so we can separate that knee-jerk, autonomic, unconscious reaction from a more leaderly, adaptive response. So we can move to the second arcs of change, which is to build our agility, resilience, and change capability. So that's the bottom line of why I created change intelligence, is when your IQ goes down in the stress of change, in the stress of crisis, CQ to the rescue. we can't choose our reaction, but we can choose our response. We can't choose that reaction, but we can choose our response. And C, we can choose different options. And that's what we're going to talk about next, is what are those change intelligent options that we all have as leaders? Because the more options we have, the more power we have. The more options we have, the more power we have. And that's why so many organizations have integrated CQ change intelligence into their change management toolkits, because it adds the often missing ingredient of not just managing change, managing the process of change with all our very necessary and very helpful and useful spreadsheets and methodologies that we have. It adds that missing ingredients of helping truly lead change, lead ourselves and lead others through change towards a brighter tomorrow, so we can all be more successful and smarter and successful together. So what are those change intelligent responses that we have as individuals, teams, and organizations? That's what we're going to talk about now. A, become aware. B, breathe. And C, choose a more adaptive, agile, resilient, change capable response. So just like any change that we go through needs engaged people, needs an effective purpose, needs an efficient process, any of us, all of us, benefit from paying attention to engaging the heart, enlightening the head, and equipping the hands. Those are, I believe, our change intelligent options to lead ourselves and others through change and crisis. It's a very humanistic model, right? Humanistic model. I think the more high tech we get in our age of digital transformation and AI, the more we benefit from getting back to basics and, again, cutting to the core of our common humanity, creating a very simple but memorable and practical, because it's actionable, common language that we can use to engage for change. So that's what we're going to talk about actually now for the rest of our short time together, is that I'm going to go through strategies and tactics that we can use first to engage the heart, starting with ourselves, then moving to our teams, then moving to the organizational level, then to enlighten the head, and then to equip the hands. I'm going to wrap it up actually with a tool that you can leverage, that you can use to facilitate this kind of conversation, this kind of exercise, this kind of dialogue with your teams, with your sponsors, with those that are impacted by the changes that you're rolling out and the crises you're experiencing right away today. So let's dive in. So let's start with leading the heart A.R.C.s, engaging the people in the changes. So another thing that we know from neuroscience is that change is an emotional journey. So how our brains also work is that we get a sensation from the outside world. We see something, we hear something, we smell something, we taste something, we touch something. And first that sensation goes to our reptilian brainstem. Then that sensation moves to our limbic system, which is the seat of our emotions. Then and only then does it move to our cerebral cortex, which is where we think. So in a very real sense, our emotions mediate all our thoughts. We feel before we think. We feel before we think. Isn't that fascinating? So as John Kotter and his colleagues at Harvard, he wrote a book called The Heart of Change, which I love. I highly recommend it. And what he talked about, what their research shows, is that how we used to think that change happens is that people are exposed to information, which causes them to think differently, which causes them to change. What we now know is that how change really occurs is that people see a new possibility. They get an insight and they see themselves in that possibility. So they see, then they feel, then they change. So it's not information, think change, it's see, feel change. Again, I think that's fascinating. Change is an emotional journey. So let's start with the heart. So starting with ourselves, we can all harness the power of positivity, putting our own oxygen mask on first. And positivity is not Pollyanna-ish. It can be defined as hope for the future, wedded to reality, or informed optimism. Martin Seligman, who is the father of the positive psychology movement, he and his research team has clearly demonstrated that positivity is correlated with better outcomes in all aspects of life, including productivity at work and relationships in general. you can actually build a more positive mindset. And one of the key ways to do that is through building new habits. And one of the most powerful new habits to form is an attitude of gratitude, an attitude of gratitude. And gratitude also reduces stress hormones and boosts immunity, which are bottom line benefits we all need at any time. So you can make gratitude a habit, such as, for example, simple practices like identifying 3 things you're grateful for at the beginning of and end of every day. When you do this regularly, the unconscious brain actually latches onto this new gratitude pattern and begins to look for the good even without your conscious attention. We can actually rewire our brains, creating a positivity bias. Also, courage and caring. I love that the root of the word courage, core in French, means heart. So here's some other great research-based scientific findings that's great news for all of us as leaders. So not surprisingly, in one of the largest and most longitudinal studies about stress, researchers found that people who experienced a high degree of stress had negative outcomes, health outcomes 3 years later. Not surprising. However, that finding was not reported in people who said that they spent time caring for others. Isn't that awesome? And of course, any of us in our global change community, that's exactly what we do. We take care of others through change, through crisis. So I think that's great news. When we focus on others and the greater good, again, we reduce stress hormones, and we bolster our own immune system. So courageous caring is an antidote to a lot of what we experience in different kind of change and crisis. Moving on to our team, how can we support our team? So at this time when we're so rightfully focused on our physical safety for a variety of different reasons, focusing on our sense of psychological safety on our team, I believe should be a dual focus. So many of us may be familiar with the research by Amy Edmonston at Harvard, which was also reproduced in Google teams around the world, that they found that the number one factor of high performance teams, number one factor that characterize high performance teams, distinguish them from average or underperforming teams, is psychological safety. Psychological safety, kind of like trust, that I feel like I can speak my truth, get my voice heard without fear of repercussion, vilification, ostracization. I can speak the truth. And in times of change, in times of crisis, trust is our number one currency. And in any time of change, again, people need to feel safe to say what needs to be said, to have their unique and important voices heard. I think that that's one of the key failure factors of change, is that people in different areas, locations, levels of the organization, they see landmines that they don't want going off, but they don't feel safe to get their voices heard. And this is one way that how we lead through change and crisis, again, how we leverage these pop-up learning labs to solve the problem of today and build capability of the future, will create an enabling foundation to lead through all the changes yet to follow. And what his research shows is one of the most powerful ways to build psychological safety on our team is to share our personal challenges, What better time to do that than through time of change, and especially through time of crisis? What a better time to embed that as a practice, as a habit in our teams right now. So again, back to the idea that change is an emotional journey, I advocate having explicitly baking in emotional temperature checks into our team's agendas, into our process. Relationships get results. As Stephen Covey taught us back in the day, he wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Building relationships with people is like putting a deposit in your emotional bank account with them. At times of change, at times of crisis, you're going to need to make a withdrawal. Connect before content. Beginning and meeting strongly. There's so many ways to do that. You can start meetings by asking each person their intention, and sharing what they want to get out of the meeting. And then at the end, you can do something similar by having everyone say what they're going to take away and what they got out of it. That provides a focus on productive work, bookended by connection between people on the team. So That's some strategies that we can use for ourselves and our teams. Now let's look at a client example of how they put these ideas into practice. So this particular example is University Hospitals of Ohio. So they trained all their 1,500 people leaders in change intelligence in the 3 years prior to the pandemic, so that when the COVID crisis hit, they already had this enabling foundation to engage for change up and down and across the system. So one practice they embedded is by starting meetings with the heart check, which I think is a great analogy for a healthcare system. So they would ask people how they're doing, what they're thinking, and especially how they're feeling. What are their concerns? What are their fears? So engagement pulse survey results that they started doing every quarter, starting in the beginning of the pandemic, revealed that people gave very positive feedback across the board for how the leaders were navigating the crisis, and people felt heard and their concerns were addressed. And this was really huge, especially at that time when so many healthcare professionals, especially nurses, doctors, staff on front lines, were experiencing significant, even debilitating moral injury for all the really tough calls some of them had to make early in the COVID crisis. So I think that's a fantastic example. Again, a simple but practical, right, practice that we can embed to demonstrate to people that, again, we're not just human doings, we're human beings, and we're starting with the heart. Change, crisis, it's an emotional journey, right? So this is a practice that you can do with your team. I would love to hear, again, in the chat, and maybe if we have some time at the end, what would be a best practice example that you would point to in your team, in your organization, about how you've led the heart through changes you're going through crises? I think that the tool I'm going to share with you is a great way to foster that dialogue and also capture some best practices that you can then again communicate and embed in your other change initiatives and across the organization. Because what is the best predictor of future success? I love a lot of the research by Dan Dennison and his team at Dennison Consulting. They do global organization culture work. They diagnose and they help organizations develop more positive, humanistic, productive cultures. So what his research shows is that the best predictor of future success in organizations is not past success, it's culture. It's culture. And how is culture created? Not by kind of lofty pronouncements from the C-suite down. How culture is created is by individual experiences, individual employee experiences. So we are all in a position to create those moments that matter for the team members that we serve. How can we intentionally connect those employee experiences to the vision and the values of the organization? Because then those experiences turns into beliefs, beliefs turn into action, and action turns into results. So, and who facilitates those kind of moments that matter, those experiences? Again, not the C-suite, but many of us that are on the front lines leading change meetings, leading change teams. So, and I also think, as we know, when people leave organizations, so often they don't report quitting the organization, they report quitting the boss, right? The people person that they, kind of connect with most and most frequently. So we have the opportunity, I believe, to reinforce our organization's culture every single day and make it a more change capable, humanistic culture. And here's some ideas on how to do that. So speaking of vision and values and purpose, let's move on to the head arc, which is all about enlightening the purpose. So starting with ourselves first again, refresh your frame. I love a joke by George Carlin. He says that, have you ever noticed when you're driving down the road that anyone driving slower than you is an idiot and faster than you is a maniac? I love that because it's exactly the same behavior that's viewed differently depending on our perspective, our frame of reference. So back to Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology, his research shows that the first step towards a more positive mindset is to separate fact from fiction. Refresh your frame, separate fact from fiction, and remember that our thoughts are not facts, and neither are the opinions of others, even pundits and so-called experts. So we can ask ourselves to disentangle what are the facts versus what are minor others' opinions, or worse, fear-based fleeting thoughts. Each of us can limit our exposure, not just to viruses, but to what's viral. I know, thanks so much to the emerging ACMP chapter in Ukraine. You kind of did a shout out on LinkedIn about this webinar today. I've done a webinar for you in the past, and I do hope that this is useful and relevant information, because literally many of our colleagues around the world are, in a situation where they're needing to protect themselves from physical danger. And a lot of times we don't think about that. We also have the opportunity to protect ourselves from kind of psychological danger, right? For some of the misinformation that might be out there. Because again, literally our immune system goes down when exposed to stressful stimuli. So we have the opportunity to be a selective consumer of information. And leadership guru Seth Godin, who did the keynote, one of the keynotes for our last ACMP Global Conference in 2019, just before the pandemic, what he talked about, he advises us to curate our content. He says that staying up to date is a scam and a trap, do the work instead, right? We can limit our exposure to, brief snippets of the news that we really need to hear from credible sources. What he talks about, he has an acronym called SIFT, sift through information. So S is stop, I is investigate the source, F is find better coverage, and T is test for validity. So sift through information. So Dalai Lama teaches, when you change the way you look at things, the way you look at things change. That's the first step, I believe, starting with ourselves, more positive mindset, boost our immunity, reduce our stress, refresh our own frame, separate fact from fiction. Reflect and reimagine. Leaders who are more effective, reflective are more effective. Leaders are more reflective are more reflective. And with the radical rebalancing of our lives and work through all our global crises, I think this is a powerful time to reflect upon what really calls to us. A lot of us in the global change community, are communications professionals, and there's a lot of fear out there potentially about the impact of, again, AI on our jobs, right, in our roles, right? There can be a lot of fear out there. However, what's the opportunity? What's the opportunity? I think a couple years ago, we were talking about the Great Resignation. I think it was the Great Reflection. People have the opportunity, we have the opportunity to reflect upon our own leadership brand, right? What could our unique contribution be to the next normal, right? And depending on where we are in our careers, even what we want our legacy to be. I think, again, we can put our own oxygen mask on first and rebreathe new life into what feeds us, and even perhaps pivot our career to rewrite the story of our own hero's journey. Moving on to supporting our team, we can also reframe reality for our team. We can reframe the why. Leaders frame reality. Leaders frame reality. So we have the opportunity to reframe the why. Simon Sinek, another thought leader who was another one of our ACMP Global Conference keynotes. If you haven't seen his wonderful TED Talk, right, about starting with why in his book, I highly recommend it. Start with why. Probably my favorite book of all time, though, is by Viktor Frankl. He was a psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And what he said is that life isn't made unbearable by circumstance, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. Isn't that amazing? So we as leaders have the opportunity to reframe our team's mission in relation to the global crises that we're experiencing. Hook and hinge what we're asking people to do on a day-to-day basis and why it matters to an inspiring purpose. So who are we? What's our mission? The leader's job is to tell the story of crisis in a way that interprets it, not spin, but rousing story. And perhaps, again, even more importantly, to show that line of sight, the connection between what you're asking people to do every day and why it really matters. That's, again, a great way to stem the Great Resignation. Or what I think is even worse is quiet quitting. And as change management professionals, we are in a great position to see that connection between what we're asking people to do and why it matters as a bigger picture goal or strategy and objectives than a lot of folks in that we may work with. So we have a great opportunity to show people that. Build in versus buy in. Well, another thing that we know is the constant lament of the leaders that we serve is, why don't they see the gold in what I'm giving them? Why are they resisting this change that obviously we need to make in our organization? Well, Change Management 101, we know that participation leads both to ownership as well as to better quality decisions. People own what they help create. Think build-in versus buy-in. Instead of reactive buy-in, think proactive build-in. Elizabeth Moss Cantor, another Harvard researcher and leadership guru, back in the day, she wrote Change Masters. She says that change is threatening when done to us, exhilarating when done by us. Threatening when done to us, exhilarating when done by us. So one thing we talk about so much is holding people accountable. Holding people accountable. I think that's exhausting for us, and it's probably insulting for other people. So we have the opportunity to change the mindset, to change our behavior from reactive buy-in, from holding people accountable, to proactive build-in, to invite them, to create an environment, a culture when we invite people to step up and be accountable. Because we all know that that is the holy grail of leading change. It's not mere compliance, it's general commitment that we own it together. Point towards progress. So getting back to an attitude of gratitude, we can focus on people's positive efforts as well as their achievements, their successes. So a key strength of leading from the head is laser focusing on the goal. So back to John Kotter, most of us know his 8 steps, right? Kotter's 8 steps in leading change. Of course, one of them is quick wins to build momentum, right? So explicitly point to the progress that our team is making. Doing so fosters that fixed versus the growth mindset. It can be so easy, as Dan Sullivan says, to focus on the gap versus the gain. Focus on the gap versus where we are versus where we want to be versus the gain of how far we've come. So again, this can help us, our team, build that growth mindset by reframing obstacles and opportunities for growth and development. So again, the tool I'm going to share with you is another powerful example for doing just that. So here's another client example of leading the head through change. So a gentleman who's a graduate of the CQ certification program, he's also a commander in the Chicago area police department. And so he is bringing both change intelligence as well as emotional intelligence to law enforcement, which is so exciting in this time of disenfranchisement and division, to really, kind of equip his colleagues to lead through conflict and promote dialogue and positive engagement with the communities they serve. Talk about refreshing your frame and transforming your reality. He's helping his colleagues lift their heads up and see the need for change from the vantage points about various stakeholders in the communities that they serve. Because what you see depends on where you sit. What you see depends on where you sit. So he's refocusing on the vision of to protect and serve and the results that they're achieving doing so. Another quote by Buckminster Fuller, who is an architect and a futurist. He says that we're called to be the architects of our future, not its victims. The architects of our future, not its victims. And behind every complaint or every protest is a request. Behind every complaint is a request, and people complain before they commit. So it's an opportunity to transition from blame to curiosity and from judgment to dialogue. But let's say that we don't work for an organization like a police department whose mission may not at first blush be so kind of deeply, profoundly impactful to society. Well, another client example is BRP. BRP, they make a variety of vehicles, including Sea-Doos and Ski-Doos. So what they did is that they hooked and hinged their products to a pivot we all had to make early in the pandemic, and they came up with the rallying cry of social distancing with enthusiasm. Social distance with enthusiasm. I think it was that great. Hook and hinge, right, our product to this vision, this mission, this purpose. I think that's just brilliant. And I believe, if I'm correct, that they tripled their revenue in the 3 years since the crisis struck. So again, I invite you to think about what are some maybe best practice examples that you can think of leading the head arcs, of leading, helping your team, yourself and your team and your organization focus even more on vision, mission, strategy, and kind of collaborating together to invent ways to continue to succeed and thrive into the future. So finally, let's look at leading the hands arc, equipping the process. I say making it real in the field. As great as people get it, It's great if they want it. Can they really do it? Can we really do it? So starting with ourselves, action is the antidote. Joan Baez, who is a folk singer, she sang in the very tumultuous crisis-ridden 1960s that action is the antidote to despair. Action is the antidote to despair. And shout out to our German colleagues in the audience. Goethe wrote that action has power and magic to it. Action has power and magic to it. Just taking that first step. Adjust the sails. I love the expression, the pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects the winds to sail, the optimist expects the wind to change, and the leader adjusts the sails. The leader adjusts the sails. So putting our own oxygen mask on first, ask yourself, how can we get unstuck and find our moorings for safety and stability so we can set sail to new tomorrow? Because agility rhymes with stability. Agility rhymes with stability. And as Brian Gorman helps us see, that we need both. We need both to adjust our sails, and we need to adjust our anchors. In the shifting sands that we're all experiencing, that stable grounding is the foundation upon which to build agility. So moving on to how can we support our team, focus attention and prioritize. I love the idea that crisis is a time to get back to basics. Patrick Lencioni, he wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He says that in times of crisis, people don't need to be instructed, they need to be reminded. Don't need to be instructed, they need to be reminded. And there's a great example of that by Vince Lombardi. So those living in this country probably know that this is football season. It's football season in the United States. So Vince Lombardi, who was the iconic coach of the Green Bay Packer football team, to coach his team out of a losing crisis, he held up a football and he said, "Gentlemen, this is a football." Talk about getting back to basics. Isn't that hilarious? Gentlemen, this is a football. Back to basics, showing the how. Showing the how helps the hands. Review and reinvent processes. So crisis is a great opportunity, not just to automate, but to obliterate, as we used to say back in the days of re-engineering. So fish don't swim the water, fish don't see the water that they swim in. So crises enable us to not just ask why, but why not? Not just convert that meeting to virtual. Do we really need it at all? Crises allow us to, call upon us to bust the box, right? And through change, we can break change. So it really allows us to think about how can we bless and release, right? Old ways of doing, thinking, believing, even succeeding. Jim Collins, another Harvard researcher, and his team, they identified 2 factors that cause organizations to be successful and sustainable over time. So over decades, what are these 2 factors that cause mighty organizations to stay mighty? And those 2 factors were 1, constancy of vision, and 2, flexibility of process. So they maintain their true north, but they chose different ways, different processes to get there. Embed new habits and routines. So just like you can rewire your own brain to embed new and more adaptive habits, we can retool our teams with new habits as well. So for example, in addition to our own personal gratitude habit, we can foster an appreciation practice on our teams. We can thank teams, we can thank individuals. And as we know, the best recognition is specific, concrete, and tangible. That serves a dual focus of getting results and building relationships, because what gets noticed gets repeated. And what we acknowledge others for helps to refocus priorities, helps to understand what are the priorities in very challenging times where people might feel like, here's something else on my plate, here's yet something else that I have to do. That attitude of gratitude, those appreciation practices on our team, again, can help align effort and target effort, right? Individual and collective through very confusing times. So here's an example of another client who did a great job leading the hands through a time of change and crisis. So this is an example of Rock Valley Credit Union, just up the road in Rockford, Illinois. So their change intelligent journey started in 2018 when a new CEO came on board that had a very bold, new, ambitious strategy that was met with a lot of resistance. It was perceived that her new strategy was very high tech in a high touch culture. So those of you who know about credit unions, you know that they're different than traditional banks. So while they still focus on the bottom line, that's important, they're a financial institution, they also are very mission-based, and they call their customers members, who they exist to serve as their top priority. So this new CEO was coming in, and she wanted to move to more remote banking, to more advanced automated teller machines, which again was met with a great deal of resistance. So we spent a year and a half working together, building change capability from the CEO to the frontline tellers to understand and then plan and execute this bold new strategy, such that when the pandemic hit, that they were able to come together to figure this out, help the hands through the new routines and habits they had embedded to do what the entire world needed to do, which was to bank more remotely and use automated teller machines, that sort of things, right? So they can continue to succeed into the future in this new world, such that they outperform the local competition who did not make those kind of changes early enough, right? And did not have that enabling foundation to collaborate together to pivot and do what we all needed to do. So, such that by the end of 2020, they emerge actually stronger, both financially as well as culturally, from everything that they did, that they took on to do. By the way, there's two case studies about this particular client's pre-pandemic journey of implementing this new strategy, as well as post-pandemic journey on my website, as well as from university hospitals, if you want to check those out, and many other client ones as well. So in our remaining time together, let me again invite you to think about, type in the chat, think about, maybe we'll have time to share, what is an example of a best practice leading the hands through crisis that you've seen, right? How have you really helped people on a very tactical, tangible level get it done, make it happen? As I say, make it real in the field, bringing this new reality to light. So here's the tool that I talked about. I call it the change intelligent analysis and action planning tool. And you can go ahead and download this from my website right now, changecatalyst.com, on the resources page. It's a simple but powerful tool that you can use to facilitate these discussions, right, and help yourself, your team, your organization move through the arcs of change and crisis. So this tool can increase people's sense of autonomy, through identifying positive actions under our immediate control. It can increase relatedness, obviously, when done in a team context together, and it can promote a sense of certainty because it can give people a game plan that they can own and create. If you do it as a repeated process, a disciplined process intentionally, it can help foster greater agility, resilience, and change capability because it promotes a culture of experimentation. There's gold to be mined in the midst of any change, and this tool helps us reveal and capitalize on the opportunities presented by crisis. So the first version of this tool, interestingly, was recommended by the VP of strategy at university hospitals, because he was in charge of helping integrate a lot of community hospitals and physicians' practices at a time of great, expansion. And he wanted to use, and he said, we can use change intelligence not just to build our own capability or our teams, but also to kind of evaluate how well we're doing integrating these new facilities, these new practices. So we started doing this as a lessons learned after action review. Because of course, anybody who's been involved in M&A knows that so often the focus is on integration from a legal and a financial sense, but not from a people, process, and cultural sense. So this really helped identify opportunities as well as gaps. So since then, though, I've also used it with clients, and clients have also kind of baked it into their change management processes to do prior to, when you're analyzing and you're planning a change, to make sure that no critical aspect gets dropped out, as well as either as a process check in the middle of changes or as lessons learned after action review. As a course correction, right? Also, when you think that things might be going wrong. So how you use this tool, it's kind of like De Bono's 6 hats thinking exercise, if you know that, or other great OD, kind of methodologies like appreciative inquiry or Kurt Lewin's force field analysis. But how you use this particular one is you go row by row. You go row by row. And since any change, any project, any reaction to any crisis needs to engage the people, it needs to focus on what is our purpose, and it needs to have an effective process, we focus one at a time, going row by row. So we start with the heart. How are we doing engaging people, teams, and culture. How are we doing building teams, building trust, communicating, collaborating, focusing on, building, not reactive buy-in, right? What have we done well, not as well? And therefore, based on our analysis, what can we do? Then we take our heart hat off and put on our heads hat and say, okay, how are we doing achieving our purpose? How are we doing moving towards the goal? How are we doing achieving our vision? How are we doing hitting our numbers, hitting our objectives? What are we doing well, not as well? What could we do differently? Finally, we take our head hat off, put our hands hat on. Okay, again, it's great. People get it, they want it. Can they do it? How are we doing? Giving people the tools, the training, the coaching, removing barriers that they need to actually get it done, right? So you can do this in a quick kind of hour team meeting, or depending on the magnitude of the change, obviously you can spend, many more hours on it and kind of capture those results. What I want to show is that this is an example of how Rock Valley Credit Union used this tool in April 2020. So to assess their response in the first few weeks of the COVID crisis. And obviously, this is just a subset of what they came up with, but it shows about how they looked at how they were doing internally as well as with their members. And the neat thing about this, that's something that I think is really kind of an actionable, applied thing that we in the change world can do, is that after the executive team, the leadership team, the CEO and her direct reports did this, each executive team member then used the tool, showed the results, and then used the tool with their individual teams. And then those middle managers did it with the frontline folks, the tellers, folks in the back office, et cetera, right? So this was a great way to both communicate down, right, in terms of this is our perspective, this is how we feel things are going, as well as to give feedback up, because again, what you see depends on where you sit. And I think this is one of the biggest failure factors in leading change, is that especially giving feedback up, that process is arthritic, if not broken, in so many organizations. And one thing that's top of mind right now, as part of the 10-year anniversary of change intelligence and the assessment, we have now tens of thousands of folks who have taken the assessment, which helps us understand our style of leading heart, heads, and hands through change. And so I shared a little bit this results in the masterclass last week, and I'm going to talk more about it, hopefully at some of the conferences next year. But we have some findings around the world that I think are very fascinating and actionable. One of them is, perhaps not surprisingly, folks at the top of organizations, senior leaders, tend to lead more from the head, right? Again, it's not 100%, but there's more of a tendency to lead from the head, which is logical. That's their job: vision, mission, strategy, steering the organization to brighter tomorrows. However, they can be the most frustrated with the resistance that they believe they're getting. And why don't they see the gold in what I'm giving them? And they can sometimes even hear questions and feedback as resistance, even questions as resistance. This gives them the opportunity to be able to communicate, this is what we see, right? And build psychological safety by vulnerably sharing, what do you see, right? And a tangible mechanism to allow people to give feedback up that's very structured, right? Very intentional. And people get, can see tangibly that they're being asked to contribute their opinion. Also, when we look at leading from the middle, leading from the front lines, and I think we're all change leaders regardless of tenure, title, or role, this could again give people the opportunity to have their voice heard, right? To share that I get it, I see the vision, I don't see myself in it though. I have fears, I have concerns, right? Or again, it's another unfunded mandate, or it's another A priority. Allows people to bubble up that feedback and builds that capability, builds the change capability about how to get their voices heard that doesn't come off as negatively complaining, but comes off as positively contributing. That's a key focus in our practice, is both coaching and developing sponsors, right, to listen, build psychological safety, as well as coaching and developing leaders at all different levels to get their voice heard. Because I think if you have the capability, that will give you more of the courage to collaborate through change. So hopefully that's useful. Just a few wrap-up comments before we see if we can have a minute or two to squeeze in a question. But if not, as Daniel said, I'm totally open. Just email me with your questions. I will definitely respond. I'm very responsive and very easy to get a hold of. So I'll tell you how to do that in a minute. But I think a lot of us are familiar with the change curve, right? That, as Lewin and Bridges, Kubler-Ross helped us see, we move from the old, letting go of the old, to the pit of productivity, valley of despair, and refreeze. One of my colleagues says, remember, maybe we never really refreeze. It's all slushy. There's so much change going on. It's more like slushy change. As Warren Buffett said, it's only when the tide goes out that we see who's been swimming naked. So sadly, as we know, some organizations are not going to be, surviving and thriving through these difficult times. However, I truly believe that if we look at both, how can we collaborate to solve the problems of the day, lead through the changes of the day and the crisis of the day, and at the same time, simultaneously, intentionally build capability for tomorrow, then it's not just a U curve, it's actually a J curve that we emerge stronger together on the other side. So I started off by promising to show you change intelligence, strategies, and tactics to lead ourselves through the arcs of change. I hope I achieved that purpose. What can we do in the stress of change when our IQ goes down? We can be aware of that, we can breathe, and we can choose more leaderly adaptive responses. We can choose to engage the heart, we can choose to enlighten the head, we can choose to equip the hands, a humanistic approach to create a common language to build our teams and our organizations, agility, resilience, and change capability. So thank you so much. Again, you can at any time continuing our learning journey, pop over to my website, download 2 free chapters of my book, as well as case studies that I mentioned and other ones in different industries around the world. If you want more information about the assessment, happy to share that with you, more information there too. And as I mentioned, Change Catalyst, our company is one of the first qualified education providers. So we do a lot of learning journeys of different lengths, including e-learning, certification, etc. And again, thank you so much, ACMP. Contact me at any time. So perhaps I'll leave that slide up here. People would like to reference this information. And Daniel, I know we just have a few minutes, and I think you might have some wrap-up things to say, but any particularly provocative question, get through chat or comment that you want to share?
Yeah, so first off, thank you so much for sharing all of that with everyone. We have time maybe for one-ish question, so I'm going to take one that people have already submitted through comments here. But what I will say to everyone else on the phone is if you have any questions that you have not yet sent in, please feel free to do that, because we will share them with Barbara and see if we can get any of those answers out to everyone through our online sort of mechanisms. And so the one that jumped out to me was that you had so many great book suggestions and references in your talk. Is there anywhere that you have like a list compiled of your book recommendations that someone can go and find, or is that something we can share with folks?
Yeah, so that's great. So also, ACMP is great by creating ACMP Connect, right, which is our online community. And so why don't I just go ahead and I'll type them in there. I'll go through my notes and I'll see what I reference, and so then we all have them together. So thanks for asking. That's a great question, actually.
Perfect. And so I think with that, I will use that both as a pivot point to the next thing and close our sort of live Q&A. Obviously, we can have more time at some other moment for live Q&A. So I want to thank everyone for participating on the ACMP webinar today, and especially would like to thank Barbara for the wonderful presentation. A few housekeeping things. Immediately following the webinar, the feedback survey will pop up. Please take just a few moments to complete our survey, as your feedback helps us shape future webinars. Don't forget to join the webinar exchange community in ACMP Connect, which Barbara just mentioned, to continue this conversation and engage with her and with all of us with some of this sort of work and thinking. The recording for this webinar will be available next week in the webinar section of the ACMP resource library located on the website at acmpglobal.org. If you already have your CCMP, remember that by attending webinars like this one, you can earn PDUs towards maintaining your CCMP. So record your hours today. And with that, thank you again to our wonderful speaker, Barbara Troutline, and to all of you for participating, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for volunteering, Daniel.
And